But can I put it to you? Here is a proposition, skeptics. Do you remember Michael Jackson always used to talk about his lost childhood? I'm beginning to wonder if really he missed the vivid imagination trips he could do before he grew up, before his adolescent hormones kicked in, because it's a wonderfully rich experience for creative people. Michael Jackson goes on and on and on about his missing childhood, and you think, well, he had everything. He had money, he had everything he really wanted, and he could never go back to his childhood. He's always like the Peter Pan syndrome, they called it. He couldn't stand being an adult. Well, I did pretty much the same, complaining to a psychologist at age 26 that I couldn't lose myself in a book anymore, couldn't live in the wonderful world of childish imagination. So maybe it's very common, this Peter Pan thing, and Michael Jackson was just the flagship for this adult wishing, this adult reverence for childhood. And you can't go back to it once the hormones kick in, you just can't. So, dear skeptics, we do notice all over the internet that many of you seem to be stuck in this photographic memory mode that we normally all lose around age 12. The hormone surge didn't work for yourself, but you're still sort of marooned there, seeing things literally. We see this all over the place. And it's raising the question whether you had something happen to you, like maybe a lot of trauma, or perhaps you were maybe poisoned by environmental toxins, lots of stuff in the food chain that we still don't understand. But we do notice you guys seem to be in a different world to us, living in this literal world, which keeps you apart from other people. And we notice that there's literalists on both sides of the atheist-theist issue. The fundamentalists and the skeptics have the same literalism when they read the Bible. We notice this.
The frequent mention of the Santa Claus myth by skeptics is a damage marker, noted by many surprised religious people. Emilio, in a previous video, having been there, describes the intense hurt, the trauma, that affects some young developing minds, in many cases preventing or delaying the development of their adult metaphorical mind. Emilio writes, itemizing the mental maturation markers missed by pseudo-skeptics, and likely fundamentalists also. These pseudo-skeptics were taken in by something, and they felt like fools. That is why they are hung up about Santa Claus. They felt like idiots for believing they haven't reached the point where they can be wrong and just let it go. No, it is personal. Marker 1. I am sure you have been wrong about something and just let it go. It just rolled off like water off a duck's back, right? These people don't have that luxury. They haven't got that neck. Marker 2. I know how that feels. It takes a lot of life experience for some people to get over themselves and enjoy life. Taking life too seriously. Marker 3. It also takes some maturity to be confronted with an idea and not feel like you have to have an opinion about it. That is a dangerous combination, to be compelled to form an opinion, and also have to be correct in that opinion, or else, grave fear. It is a huge weight that no one has to bear. That is the ironic part, that this maddening burden is purely optional. You can just skip away without forming any opinion at all. You can think about it later. It takes some maturity to see it in this context. This too hard basket can be as big as you want. These people think that to have the correct opinion about everything makes them intelligent. Marker 4. Everything else is willful ignorance, and that is what is wrong with the world. So we can note here, in light of the Brain Scan book from Dr. Norman Boyd, that the early trauma of feeling intensely betrayed by the Santa Claus myth unleashes brain chemicals, glucocorticoids, which shrink the hippocampus and delay the onset/effectiveness of adolescent maturation, specifically the hormonal surge that transforms their memory and mind from literal to metaphorical, which prevents them using the useful mental aid of the too hard basket, which is a metaphorical concept, specifically supplying a useful mental workaround, enabling complexities to be comfortably dealt with by the growing mind. The absence of the so-convenient metaphorical too hard basket concept is noteworthy among online skeptic postings. Many thanks to Emilio for his explanatory candor. Benefits for all viewers.
I'll just repeat to you, remind you that Dr. Norman Dodge's book has got an astonishing appendix of peer-reviewed studies into brain scan imaging. Some 300 peer-reviewed papers are in the appendix of the book. So this is all based on my understanding, my reading of this excellent book that I recommend to all of you. And I'm going to say something now about a fundamentalist that I encountered over the internet in New Zealand. An incredibly bright fellow he was, with an IQ of 180. Now, have you ever met a person with an IQ of 180? It turns out he had a mind like a rapier. Very, very resourceful, intelligent man. He was an IT expert, and on instant messaging, any question I asked, he'd have the answer back to me before I finished my question, practically. It arrived within seconds, you see. So, very, very resourceful man mentally. I admire that in him. He's still in New Zealand. And because he was a fundamentalist and a voracious reader when he was a child, he'd read the Bible from cover to cover. And he memorised it accidentally when he was a child, in the same voracious reading mode that I was in my childhood, you see, that I lost when I grew up, you see. What surprised me was he was still like that when he was 20-something. That was kind of interesting to me. So, not knowing a lot about the Bible, because I have never been religious in my whole life. I come from a secular society like Sweden and Denmark, Australia, and so I began asking him a few questions about the Bible, and I discovered he could very quickly supply any answer on the Bible text itself, like where it was, who said it, and what chapter it was in. You see, chapter and verse available in 5 seconds on any question about the Bible. Who said this? Who said that? You know, what part of the Bible do they ever say this in? You see, so I found that was a fascinating thing to do. So here I had my own sort of Bible archivist who could just tell me anything I needed to know about the Bible, and with great certainty I'd get the answer in a few seconds, you see. So as a little aside, I'm going to tell you a question I put to him, this fundamentalist, and it's a wonderful example of literal memory, because I discovered he didn't really understand what he was reading half the time. Certainly not from an adult's point of view. Not from a grown adult's point of view, even though he was 21, 22 something. I asked him a question, something that had never occurred to him, because he memorised things so well, he did not question them. Rather like a child under 12. And the question was this. Jesus said something about entering the kingdom of heaven. He describes it in a number of ways, this state of being in the kingdom of heaven. Where does Jesus say that you have to be dead first to know the kingdom of heaven? And this time, he took a whole 30 seconds to answer me. And he said, it's not in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. So I instantly put back to him another question. So why do you believe this? Well, who started the notion that you've got to be dead to go to heaven? Who started that? Is it in the Bible? Specifically there anywhere? And he said, no, it's not. Instant messaging, bang, bang on MySpace. So I said, so where does the notion come from that the churches teach? That if you behave, you'll go to heaven when you die? Where does it all come from? And he came back to me and he said, it must be the church has tacked on their own stuff to the Bible teaching, because it's not written anywhere. Now, that's a good example of the fact that he didn't use his immense IQ to question it, because he'd been learning all this stuff in this photographic, literal mindset that he was still in. Somehow his hormones hadn't kicked in properly and finished off his growing up process. So we see in this person, the fundamentalist with the photographic literal memory, behaving exactly, unquestioningly remembering things like a tape recorder, just like little Johnny back in the 1930s in my mother's class. Not questioning of a lion running around the world. Never questioned it, just remembered it, because it came from an authority figure, you see. So we see a lot of this in fundamentalists, and we see it in skeptics who, thanks to Emilio in the previous video about the traumatizing effects of Christianity, we got some interesting information there that it's highly likely that skeptics are former fundamentalists or victims of fundamentalism. There are escapees from fundamentalism. Emilio describes a very fascinating journey there from being exposed to fundamentalism and then escaping to become a skeptic. Maybe a lot of the guys watching are like that. Kind of fascinating, eh? But turns out there's a solution, a fix. So guess what I did for this fundamentalist in New Zealand? I told him the one thing that the great religions had been hiding from him, and I'm going to tell you now in a minute or two. I told him the one thing that the great religions had distracted him from, prevented him from ever discovering for himself. I'll just explain to you the activity of the religions in an overall picture, a macro perspective. The great religions over many centuries have always been operated, they're in bed with money and power, political power, and their great function is to distract you from discovering a vital piece of knowledge. And that is, the vital piece of knowledge is that you really don't need the great big franchise of pointy buildings they call churches. You don't need them at all. You don't need to do all these rituals, doing things on Sundays and Easter and all that and Christmas. You don't have to do any of those things. But the religions won't ever stop reminding you that you must do your rituals. And while ever you're busy doing all these things, and they give you this great big thick book full of complicated contradictory things that can take a lifetime to work out, to make sense of. And in fact, you may never actually do that. It doesn't matter because they don't care if you make sense of it or not, because the object is to distract you from discovering something for yourself. I discovered what this is myself, and I was able to show it to the fundamentalist in New Zealand, and I'll tell you what happened. By knowing this one thing, he was matured over a period of about 12 months, and he changed from being a literal thinker to a metaphorical one. He became a lot more grown up over a 12-month period. Cost him nothing, but once he understood that the great religions had done a huge snow job on him, just to keep him working, paying taxes and being obedient, doing things on Sundays, that sort of stuff, basically supporting the ruling elites, because administrators, kings and princes all over the centuries always use religion to install obedience in people, just like the school system does too. Okay? That's what the purpose of the great religions is. To distract you from stuff you can do for yourself, which you certainly can. And I'm going to tell you about that very soon. Wonderful video letter we got from Emilio in the US, who was a refugee from fundamentalism and became an atheist. He's an atheist. He just said all you had to do was sneer at everything you previously revered. You could just hate everything you previously held sacred. And that's how you flip from being a fundamentalist to a professional atheist on YouTube. Now, that was slowly beginning to happen to the New Zealand man, the fundamentalist, because, believe it or not, he'd been excommunicated by his church for asking all the people in it about some of the things in the Bible. So he was waking up. He was asking questions. And one day they said, "You're excommunicated. You're out of here. You're not one of us. You keep asking hard questions," you see. So, left to his own devices, he could have become an angry fundamentalist, just like Emilio in that previous video. But he didn't. He found myself first. And that's a very interesting thing that you can do. Now, bear in mind, I've never been religious, coming from a secular country like Australia. But I did learn, and that's another story how I got there. I learned a lot about evolution and how it confers on you the ability to learn many, many different things. And Dr. Norman Doidge's book about this very matter says, when you learn to ride a bike, you develop new areas and millions of new brain cells, neuronal networks,